In the summer of 1941, German forces crossed the Finnish USSR border to advance towards their objective, the Murmansk to Leningrad railway. However, the German Arctic forces bogged down and failed to reach their allotted objective. In the spring of 1942, also a Soviet offensive to push the Germans back failed, and the Arctic front turned into a deadlock, hallmarked by small battles, patrols, and raids. As the front settled down, the German forces were separated on two fronts. To the south, the Kandalashka front was held by two infantry divisions of the 36th Corps. Up north, the line opposite Murmansk was held by one coastal defense division and two Gebirgsjäger divisions of the 19th Mountain Infantry Corps. The Arctic front was set in taiga and tundra. Vast forests, lakes, swamps, and rocks, coupled with the Arctic climate, made life in the front line difficult, and unlike most other battlefields of the Second World War. In this video, we will take a closer look at just one raid that took place on the Arctic front. It serves as an example of how the soldiers on the ground conducted warfare in those unusual conditions, and it helps light on a previously unexplored campaign. The front line itself consisted of a series of outposts and strongholds spaced out in the rugged terrain to create interlocking support. In early January 1944, the 1st Battalion 143rd Gebirgsjäger Regiment was tasked to prepare a raid on the Soviet strongpoint on Hill 858 along the frozen Litsa River in the line of the 19th Mountain Infantry Corps. The raid was put in place to capture prisoners and destroy as much equipment as possible to disrupt Soviet operations in the locality and gather intelligence. Hill 858 hadn't been attacked since 1941, and the 1st Battalion therefore received 1 month to plan operations. The southern and western slopes of the hill had been considered insurmountable, leaving the Gebirgsjäger a difficult task. Earlier intelligence had highlighted that the Soviet garrison atop the hill was held by one reinforced platoon. The Germans in return collected 28 men to conduct a raid, led by Oberfeldwebel Hofer. Hofer's force was subdivided into an assault squad with Hofer, one squad leader and 10 men, and two supporting squads comprising one squad leader and 7 men each. The assault squad was equipped with machine guns and captured Soviet submachine guns, while the supporting squads had rifle grenades. The raid itself was to be directed from an advanced command post on top of Hill 783. In the run-up to the raid, Hofer's force familiarized itself with the terrain and the objective. From Base Camp 2 and the observation post on top of Hill 791 and Hill 742, the Gebirgsjägers carefully planned their attack on Hill 858. Towards noon on 1 February 1944, light snow flurries began to fall. By evening, a proper snowstorm further covered the Arctic's tundra and taiga. The thick snowflakes were a perfect disguise to cover the raid. All preparations had been made. During the approach, the assault squad of the 1st Battalion Gebirgsjäger Regiment 143's raiding force was to be divided into two, with each half being guided to the jump-off line by the supporting squads. The supporting squads were to subsequently take up their allotted positions on the southern and southeastern slopes of Hill 858, while the assault reassembled and prepared to launch the main assault. At 0:30 am on 2 February, the 28 men dressed in white parkas set off from Base Camp 2 together with elements of the battalion HQ. A machine gun took up a position on Hill 791 to cover the attack. Shortly after the raiding party had left base camp, the snow decreased, the sky cleared up, and the moonlight partly lit up no man's land. Hill 783 was reached at 1:15 am. Once the command post had been erected, the assault force continued towards Hill 858. By 3 am, the moon had set. Despite Soviet flares lighting up the sky on several occasions during the way up, the foot of the hill was safely attained. In order to reach the jump-off point, the Gebirgsjäger had to crawl and climb in two single files over the steepest sections of the hill. By 3:45 am, the entire raiding party was at the jump-off line. As the supporting squads moved into position, Hofer's force worked its way towards the road leading to the objective from the east. The first Soviet sentry was spotted less than 40 meters from the first communication trench. When the Soviet sentry disappeared, Hofer and his men moved along the communication trench to a series of shelters in the northeastern end. As the party advanced into the Soviet outpost position, a Soviet infantryman came towards them. The Gebirgsjäger tussled with the Soviet. A second sentry had come up unobserved and began to shout that Germans had entered the outpost before he himself managed to retreat to a nearby shelter. Fearing that the whole outpost would soon be alerted of their presence and the fact that they had already managed to capture one prisoner, Hofer decided to withdraw at once. In quick succession, the assault squad, followed by the two supporting squads, withdrew from Hill 858. The Soviets chasing the retreating Gebirgsjäger were suppressed by the submachine gun fire and rifle grenades of the rear guard. Oberfeldwebel Hofer is said to have been the last to retreat from the hill. The Soviets, now well aware of the German retreat, began to mortar the Litzer Valley in the hope of cutting off the retreating Gebirgsjäger. At 4:40 am, the raiding party had reached a point halfway between hills 858 and 783, from where they sent up a red flare. The signal was visible along the whole front, and the supporting machine guns and mortars on the adjacent hills began to pummel the Hill 858 defences. With the Hill 858 garrison further suppressed, Hofer's party continued to retreat towards the Litzer River. However, in spite of well-aimed fire at Hill 858, Soviet mortars coming from the hill, supplemented by heavy machine gun fire from the neighbouring Hill 766, joined in, to which the Germans had no response. The Litzer Valley was soon raked by heavy machine gun fire, while Base Camp 2 was subjected to accurate mortar fire. The Gebirgsjäger still hadn't suffered a single casualty. However, as they were moving up the slope of Hill 791, at the bottom of the Litzer Valley, a burst of machine gun fire wounded 5 men. A 120mm shell also landed among a machine gun nest on the southern slope of Hill 791, causing 6 further casualties. By 5:30 am, the final elements of the raid had arrived at Base Camp 2. All the wounded were brought in and firing ceased in the sector. The raid had been a partial success. Hofer's men had been able to bring in a Soviet prisoner and had gathered some intelligence. However, they suffered several wounded men in return. The raid at Hill 858 serves as a great example for the fighting that occurred in the High North between 1941 and 1944. Months of preparation often resulted in little additional intelligence. The rugged terrain further made this battlefield a front unlike any other. This was the Ace Destroyer. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, why not consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. I hope to catch you in another video. Cheers.